Ashraf Haidari. He's Afghanistan's ambassador to Sri Lanka. Ambassador, always good to speak to you. Now, you and I have spoken quite a bit in the last 2 weeks, and you've disputed the amount of territory the Taliban has taken. But now it seems very evident that they are in control of major cities in the country and are closing in on Kabul. Do you still believe Afghan forces can keep the capital from falling?
Well, when we had been talking, of course, our forces had been fighting. There not been in these larger scale surrenders which have been taking place due to a variety of factors and reasons that we don't have time to discuss here. At this point, what everyone is concerned and the government of Afghanistan is concerned is to avert a humanitarian crisis that's already unfortunately there, affecting hundreds of thousands of Afghans across the country. What we only see is in Kabul, unfortunately, where access to information elsewhere has been unfortunately cut simply because our free press, the freest in the region, has disappeared. As a result, there is no information as to what's happening to internally displaced people, to those who have fled their homes, and the just large-scale disruption of and destruction of everything. So that's where the situation stands. It's very concerning. Right now, of course, efforts are being made to reduce any further violence that could affect innocent civilians, which this imposed war has been affecting from the very beginning. It's the Afghan people, the innocent civilians, especially women and children, over the past 3 months that have borne the brunt of this imposed conflict and recent extremely violent offensives.
Ashraf, you've tweeted recently that you are disappointed with the UN, for example, and I quote, for doing nothing for the past year while watching what's been happening in Afghanistan. Why do you feel let down by the international community?
Well, the international community actually has been aware of what has been going on in Afghanistan. And of course, our appeals to an immediate ceasefire. Remember, the UN Secretary General himself had been calling on the Taliban for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in order to address the challenge of COVID on the one hand, and those who have been already affected by the ongoing terrorist attacks that have been happening for quite some time, and other humanitarian crises that the Afghan people have been facing already. Much of what you are seeing is not new. Much of what we are seeing is a result of inaction, the kind of tangible action that we had been expecting from the international community to avert a situation that we are seeing is unfortunately had not happened. So even now, as we speak, now we should immediately come together and get a humanitarian ceasefire in place so that we see what the situation is on the ground, at least to help address the basic needs of innocent civilians, not just in Kabul, those who have poured from across the country, but in so many other provinces in a country which had already been hit hard by the adverse effects of climate change, many floods, drought is there, and of course ongoing war and violence. So that's why I think the United Nations could have, especially the Secretariat, could have called for emergency sessions of the United Nations Security Council and act on the provisions of the United Nations Charter, Chapter 7, to halt direct and indirect acts of aggression through the Taliban and, of course, other terrorist networks allied with them regionally and transnationally. Unfortunately, we have been let down. The people of Afghanistan have been let down. You hear about evacuations, which for the Afghan people means, of course, your lives, you and your future no longer matter. and that democracy and democratic gains, women's rights, human rights, name it. Just basically a basic way of life that people enjoy in our region and the rest of the world. Remember, Afghans are not asking for anything more than the continuation, the continuity of a normal life, something that we are now being denied. And I'm very much on behalf of the people that I've been very much a part of. I have a very people's background. I spent all my life in Afghanistan. I worked on the streets of Kabul to support my family and to even learn the English to speak to you on the streets of Kabul back in the days when the same city was shelled by, added extremists and terrorists, unfortunately, for the same reason.
And
so
I
Afghan
imagine
people a lot, and I think we've been let down, and everyone knows this.
And I imagine it must be very difficult for you to be in another country and watch what's happening in your own country at the moment. We've been talking a lot about the Taliban taking over Kabul. Are there fears that they will take over the government? What does it mean for someone like you who is part of the Afghan government but not in the country at the moment?
Well, Afghans have been through these things, unfortunately, I should say, tragedies over the past 40 plus years. So we wouldn't be surprised if this happened, simply knowing that we have been so over-reliant on international aid and support. And we know that some of the stakeholders, as we know in this case in the United States, could have prevented this from happening. They had the intelligence, they had been watching, regional players in the region and their support for the Taliban and other terrorist networks and so on and so forth. So this situation shouldn't have happened. Even today, of course, Kabul is where much of Afghanistan's population resides, simply because of the conflicts of the past 20 years. So Kabul still can be saved. Arrangements still could be made. It really, like I said, depends very much on the international community, the key stakeholders, especially the United States and its allies and our allies, as we've been fighting and bleeding together to make the gains of the past 20 years. And those gains are, nothing extraordinary really. It's just about, basic socioeconomic facilities and opportunities in order to enable a nation to thrive and to contribute to the international community, to its region. Remember, we have always been talking about connectivity, and then we see just over the past 3 months that much of what we've been achieving with so much aid from the international community has been destroyed in front of our eyes. So this is a tragedy for the people of Afghanistan to see their country, their state being unraveled by a group of state non-actors who are die-hard enemies of not just Afghan people, but regional stability and international peace and security. And even Turkey itself knows from its own experience and its continued war against extremism and terrorism. So does even Pakistan. So does the rest of the region. The consensus about the prevention of what's happening has always been there, including even the recent statement, if you look at from the Troika Plus, where their ambassadors and envoy Smith and Doha called, for halting this, violence and to jumpstart the peace process and to, work out a solution that's win-win, that's going to prevent further violence, targeting innocent civilians, and the destruction of the Afghan state and everything we have achieved so far.
Ashraf Haidari, thanks so much for speaking to us live to us from Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo.